Good morning, everyone. You should have just taken your World Wars test, and now we're going to jump into the Cold War here quickly. So, before we get going on the rest of this Ed puzzle, I do want to make sure you have the materials you need. So, you obviously have the Ed puzzle open here, but go ahead and open up this student note sheet too. When we're all done with this Ed puzzle, you're going to want to go back and fill out the information on the sheet. Maybe you can do it while we go. That's up to you. All right, so here it is. This is what we're working with, just this little bit here. All right, let's do this thing. Okay, that's great. All right, here we go. So we are going to be looking at, in this today, just the post World War II stuff. So let's see what happens kind of next in our story. All right, so war ends in Germany, and they meet at a place called Yalta. It's in Eastern Europe here. And we've got the three big allies that are going to meet here. FDR, right? He's still alive at this point. Joseph Stalin, this guy right here, he is the leader of the Soviet Union. And Winston Churchill, this guy right here. Winston Churchill is the Prime Minister of Great Britain. All three of these men have been in charge for the duration of the war, and they've had this alliance throughout with a common enemy of the Nazis. They've been able to put aside all their other differences and focus on defeating the Nazis. And so now that the Nazis have been defeated, they're kind of taking their relationship to the next level to see if it'll work out. So the Soviet Union, after this, after defeating Germany, is planning to now go to the war in the Pacific and help out there. Now, we talked about this the other day where we really didn't want that to happen, but and it was part of the reason why part of that is we factored into dropping of the atomic bomb. Now, one of the things they decided at Yalta was what to do with Germany. Right now, after World War I with Germany, they had decided to punish them beyond belief, take away and strip away everything, including set up a new government, make them pay billions of dollars of reparations, all that kind of stuff. Now we know that really directly led to the rise of Hitler, the rise of the Nazi Party, and in turn, World War II. We don't want that to happen. So we're going to try something different. Instead, we do this. We take Germany and we divide it into 4 sections. So France, you saw, wasn't part of the big 3, but they're on here as well. So the United States, we're going to technically get control of this orange area. France has this area down here. Now remember, France is really close to Germany, so that's part of the reason why they're involved in this. Britain, right here, and then the Soviet Union are going to get a section right here. Now, one additional factor of this is if you look inside of the Soviet Union's part is this little area. That looks pretty similar to the rest, kind of a mini version. And this is the city of Berlin. Now, I don't know what that noise is. I'm sorry if you can hear that. The city of Berlin also is divided up. So they take that capital city and they divide it up. But this gets tricky because it's within the Soviet territory. So we have to trust the Soviets that they're going to be able to get out of the Soviet territory, in these 3 sections here. So we'll see how that goes. You can imagine. Now, as time goes on, it becomes very obvious that the thing that held us together with the Soviet Union, that hatred of the Nazi army, that's gone, obviously. And now we don't have much in common anymore. And this relationship really isn't working out anymore. Joseph Stalin really feels that communism is going to ultimately defeat this idea of capitalism, the idea of freedoms that we have with business and our economy. He knows that he cannot challenge the US or Great Britain or us together to militarily defeat capitalism. But what he's hoping to do is to take his ideas of communism and spread them worldwide as far as he can. So that he's hoping to pull in other countries that may be on the fence about this and help countries that are struggling. And under his guiding hand, which is, we know, totalitarian and terrible, but under his guiding hand, he wants to make as many countries communist as possible. Now, us, the US, Great Britain as well, we do not like this. We like people to be able to make choices, to decide what they want to do with their life, to decide their leadership, to decide, what kind of education and job they're going to have. So we don't like this idea of communism. And so while the Soviets are trying to spread communism everywhere, we are going to try to contain it. We're not going to go in and try to change countries that are already communist, but we're going to try and hold it where it's at, like a container, right? A container holds things. We're going to try and keep it where it's at and help other countries resist communism as much as possible. So Winston Churchill gives this famous speech. We call it the Iron Curtain speech. And in this speech, he talks about this. And he says, an iron curtain has descended on the continent. Now, he's not talking about a literal iron curtain, but what he's saying is we're at an impasse. You cannot compromise the ideals of communism and capitalism. They don't go together. And so the best we can do is try to separate and keep ours over here and help as many people become a capitalist and free like we are, and try to contain communism where it's at. So what is communism? Communism is the idea that the government controls everything. And so with that, with the government controlling and owning everything, they're going to be able to provide their people with jobs, with healthcare, with education, even with housing, with all those basic necessities. The idea is that the government provides those for you. Now, in return for that stuff, the people in a communist country are expected to work for that government. And sometimes, most of the time, they don't get much of a say in what they do. So the government is going to dictate what jobs you have, what type of healthcare you have, what the government laws are going to be, who's in charge of the government, what type of education you are, right? So the idea is the government controls and owns everything and provides the services for the people. And in return, the people do what the government says. Right? And so it gets rid of that freedom piece, that the freedom to choose those decisions. It could potentially also get rid of some of the risk of making bad choices. And in theory, maybe that's what it would do. But in reality, how we have seen communism work in the past is that it has not worked out that way. Traditionally, there is some sort of dictator that takes over everything and really does suppress the rights of the people. So in reaction to this, Harry Truman, who we were introduced to in class in our last unit, he's now the president. FDR has passed away. And with the end of the war, one of the things Truman wants to do here is he wants to make sure that he has enough help for the people that want to resist communism. And so he makes a statement, we now call it the Truman Doctrine, that says the US is going to help any free people that are trying to resist communism. Right? So if they have a communist government and they're going to try to overthrow it, we might provide some assistance for them. If communism is trying to come into their country, we might try and help stop that. And we did that all the way up to the end of the Cold War. And we did that in a wide variety of ways. We provided assistance in food and supplies and money and things like that. Sometimes we did secret backdoor deals where we sold weapons to rebels that were trying to overthrow governments. We went to war in Korea and in Vietnam and a handful of other places as well. So we did a wide variety of things in the name of the Truman Doctrine to help any country, any group that was trying to resist communism. Sometimes it was pretty controversial because sometimes some of the people we helped were kind of sketchy. But in this greater battle of kind of good versus evil that's going on here in the Cold War, we're willing to put aside some of that other sketchy stuff to fight that bad guy, communism. So one of the first areas where this is really tested is in the late 1940s. In the late 1940s, the Soviet Union decided to test this idea of kind of controlling an area and limiting what the people within their side can do, and also trying to take some area away from capitalist countries. And they're going to start with Berlin. It felt like a low risk area for them to kind of test this out. And so what they did is they created a system where those living in this area, the French, British, and US area of Berlin, we call it West Berlin, they did not let them leave. And they just kind of wanted to see, would we crumble? How would we react to that? And so that's what this video here is about. Here we go.
President Truman addresses a joint session of Congress.
After World War II, U.S. President Harry Truman feared the Soviet Union would spread communism across Western Europe. So in 1947, he announced a new foreign policy to stop it.
It must be the policy of the United States to support free peoples who are resisting attempted subjugation. If we falter in our leadership, we may endanger the peace of the world.
But Soviet Premier Joseph Stalin saw the Truman Doctrine and the American aid that flowed into the continent through the Marshall Plan as threatening his hold over communist Eastern Europe. He feared that Germany, which had been divided and disarmed after the war, might be reunified under Western control.
Stalin doesn't like that idea. It's a threat to Soviet survival. And so he's trying to find some way to stop that. And then right at his feet here is this city of 3 million people that's surrounded by the Soviet zone.
Berlin, which had itself been divided into Soviet and Western zones, was located deep within communist territory, so the Soviets set up a blockade to cut off West Berlin from the rest of Europe.
Berlin becomes a city of darkness as all ground communication is severed and industry comes to a standstill.
We consider this hunger blockade a crime against humanity. The Americans, the British, and the French. Be steadfast. You must not desert the Berlin population.
Although the Western powers quickly began to airlift in what supplies they could, they realized that without enough troops, they wouldn't be able to hold the city for long.
The expectation was that we would withdraw, and probably with our tail between our legs, and just try and make the best of it. So the airlift sort of begins as an improvisation attempt to buy some time, an attempt to reassure the Berliners.
Gail Halverson was one of the American pilots who volunteered to airlift food into Berlin.
At the time, I was having difficulty in a relationship with a girlfriend of long-term standing, and I decided I just will be over there as over here.
One day, after landing in Berlin, Halverson started talking to a group of German kids standing at the fence line.
I went over a little ways to meet the kids. I was impressed with them. 10 plus or minus 2 years old, and they just to say, hey, we don't want to go to the Soviets. We'll do anything. Just don't give up on us. Kids that age, knowing the importance of free agency, the ability to govern yourself. They said, just don't worry about us. Someday we'll have enough to eat. But if we lose our freedom, we'll never get it back. And I marveled at that.
Halverson wanted to give them something, but he only had 2 sticks of gum. So he broke them in half and told the children to keep an eye out for his plane the next go-around.
Well, I knew what it was like to be cut off and to be out on the end of the string. And so it was just a no-brainer to drop chocolate bars to the kids in West Berlin that didn't have any.
I was elated. I saw Gail Halverson's airplane wiggling the wings, and we all waved. We called him the Schokoladenbombe, the chocolate bomb. And then we saw these parachutes coming out of his airplane. Of course, there were more children than parachutes, and the boys were always faster. But that was not important. The important thing was this was something hopeful happening to us. This was like, in those ruins, all of a sudden flowers came to bloom.
The newspaper guy was there covering the kids and the airlift, and all of a sudden he looked up above and parachutes and candy bars were coming down. And he had that on the news right away, and the colonel called me and said, Halverson, what are you doing over in Berlin? Well, and I knew he knew. I said, they're dropping candy to the kids. He says, well, keep it up and keep me informed. Candy companies were super. They sent over all I could drop, and we had all our pilots tying up extra parachutes. We'd even dropped some in East Berlin. The Soviets complained about that, so we just kept doing it in West Berlin.
Halverson's candy drops soon became the face of an airlift that was rapidly succeeding beyond anyone's wildest dreams.
It seems laughable at first that planes can bring in enough food to keep alive a city of more than 2 million. But they do.
As the deliveries mounted steadily until over 5,000 tons a day were being unloaded at Berlin's airports, the supplies came to mean something more than food for hungry people.
Aircraft were continually in flight at 3-minute intervals around the clock.
So they do this for over a year. Really wasn't thinking that this airlift was going to be successful, but it really just was, let's do the next day, let's do the next day, let's do the next day, until it gets to a point where they've got a system, they're able to provide for people, you've got enough people willing to participate that it works. So this really was a joint effort of a group called NATO. NATO is an organization still around today. It's called the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. And it was created, it was an alliance of free nations, nations that want to unite against communism. And this was one of the first things that NATO does in reaction to the Soviet Union. They work together to assist the people in this free territory of West Berlin until the Soviets are willing, until the Soviets give up. Now, shortly, not too long after that, the Soviets are going to try some other things to control Berlin, eventually the Berlin Wall in the early 1960s. But for the time being, it seemed that here was Joseph Stalin and the Soviet Union trying to take over territory that was under our control. We're trying to give it up and make them free democracy. And he's not able to do that. We're able to resist that. It was a big win in these first few years of the Cold War. But as time goes on, fear about this begins to entrench within people more and more. We start to see more atomic weapons being made. So by 1949, shortly after the airlift here, the Soviet Unions are going to test an atomic bomb, right? By 1952, Truman is going to create or order the hydrogen bomb to be tested, right? So this is even bigger than the atomic bomb. And so now we have a full-on arms race going on. And the truth is, nobody knows how nuclear weapons are going to play into this in the future. We just had used them not even 5 years before this. So is this now going to be like the way that things are done in warfare? And people were really fearful of a all-out nuclear war. And so in reaction to that, the U.S. creates the Civil Defense Administration, which is a program run by the federal government to help protect Americans from attack. And they put out all sorts of media and information about what to do if an atomic attack would come to your city or would come to America in general. Probably the most famous part is this video right here. This is a video that'd be played for kids called Duck and Cover with Bert the Turtle here. Maybe you've seen some of this before. But here's Bert. And this is a way for kids to understand the importance, right? The severity of the potential of nuclear war without scaring them to death type of thing. All right. So here he is, Bert the Turtle. And, they'd go through and they'd give all sorts of information. They'd just skip through like different scenarios in their life. So if you're at school, this is what you do. This is why we're doing this. They're explaining why do we have these drills? Well, we have fire drills. We have other drills to keep us safe so we know what to do.
And you have fire drills in your school so you know what to do. Have you ever seen?
Now, what would happen if a nuclear bomb would come?
It could hurt you in different ways. It could knock you down hard or throw you against a tree.
It's pretty hilarious because that's devastating and terrifying if you're in that, but okay. What happens if you get, this radiation on you? Well, it's like a sunburn, kind of making that connection for kids.
our own way. First, you
Right?
duck.
And then the rest of the video, they go through all these scenarios. So like, what do you do if you're on the playground? What do you do if you're, you know, walking down the street, riding your bike?
Duck against the wall this way.
What if you do if you're in the hallway at
Back of
school?
your neck, covered
All that
tightly.
kind of stuff. So tons of
Try to
stuff like
fall
that.
away from windows or
Um,
doors with glass in them.
So this is a pretty common one. Kids would watch this at school on a film strip or whatever. But all of this does lead to a decent amount of fear. And we get this time period. We've had a time period like before this, before World War II. We call it the Red Scare. So we've had this kind of idea a couple times, but it's like this amplified fear about what could happen if, you know, communism would take over America. But this got amplified in the 1950s here under this man. His name was Joseph McCarthy. And Joseph McCarthy was actually a senator from Wisconsin, and he led a very public investigation. He was in charge of this committee to look into people in America who they thought might be communist. But it got really out of control, kind of like a witch hunt type of thing. And you have political leaders that are being called out. People are, the media and these politicians are warning the American people that, you know, there could be communism right in your neighborhoods, and this is going to lead to paranoia. People are afraid that the communists are going to infiltrate our government from within, and so all these people start getting called out. It creates this culture of fear, and nobody really stands up to McCarthy, for a while, because they are then afraid that they're going to be the next target. And when they get targeted, some people got put in jail, some people got fired from their jobs, some people just kind of got blacklisted. And so it got really, really tense, let's say. Finally, by the time you get to 54, McCarthy is kind of out of control. Nobody's holding him in check. He's accusing all these people really with no evidence. And he starts accusing people in the U.S. Army and within the White House staff itself. And this is too far. By this time, Dwight Eisenhower is president. And he kind of steps in and he stops this investigation. He really tells McCarthy, as the president, now you've gone too far. This is too much. And he puts an end to this thing. And after that, McCarthy's whole reputation unravels. People begin to see the lies and the deceit within what he was doing. And he loses his next election, and then he dies 3 years later from alcohol abuse. So that is a terrible ending. But yeah, that's what happens. All right. So here's our last question then. Go ahead and answer this as well in your notes. Thanks for listening, guys. This was a lot of stuff, but hopefully you're able to kind of catch up. I would highly recommend going back to your note sheet, like we said before, and based on what we talked about here, making sure you've got the vocab and the stuff that you need for what will be our last test of the trimester here. So thanks, and we'll check you later.